Hi everyone, happy Friday. Hope that you are all doing well on this wonderful day. Welcome. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. It's called Let's Talk Health, and every week we chat about different health topics, and we have a live Q&A where I answer your questions and provide some health tips. So this week, as you can all see by the title of the video, we're going to be chatting about how you can boost your energy. So I'm going to go into different root causes of fatigue and then ways that you can help to overcome those conditions and boost your energy. So I want to know in the comments, do you experience fatigue? Are you tired daily, or maybe you're tired here and there, day to day, or does fatigue impact your everyday life? So let me know in the chat, and then let's see what people have to say. So some of the root causes of fatigue that I'm going to be going into today include nutrient deficiencies, thyroid disorders, so like hypothyroidism, we're going to be chatting a little bit about that, a poor diet and how that can impact your fatigue and energy. Something called adrenal fatigue, which is basically due to high stress, so we're going to be chatting a little bit about that. Chronic gut infections and how that has a role in fatigue and energy. And then last but not least, we're going to be chatting about inflammation. So those are 6 root causes of fatigue. There's definitely many more, but those are 6 of the ones that I'm going to be going over today. And we're going to go into detail about what are the causes of those ones, what are the symptoms, what you would have to look out for, and then how you can, treat, or what are some tips that I can provide you to help with that. So if there's any, other ones that maybe you experience, you can let us know after we've chatted about these ones. But yeah, so let me see. So some people, so someone's saying in the comments that their energy has been low lately in the afternoon. So sometimes that can happen in the afternoon, and that's due to our cortisol. So when I talk a little bit about the adrenal fatigue, I will chat a little bit about the cortisol and why sometimes we can feel a little bit of dip of energy in the afternoon. So before we dive in, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join the community so you can be notified every Friday when I go live, and give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and getting the video noticed across YouTube, so we can have more people come back and join us every week. Okay, so let's jump into the nutrients. So like I mentioned, nutrient deficiency. So this can be a big cause of fatigue if we have deficiency in certain nutrients. So the common ones are B12, iron, and vitamin D. So I'm going to go into a little bit about those. So if you're not familiar with vitamin B12, it is important for red blood cell production and also for our nervous system. So our red blood cells are important for carrying oxygen throughout the body. So this kind of goes a little bit with iron. I'll talk about that in a bit. But if you don't have optimal red blood cells or optimal red blood cell production, then you might not have oxygen getting to the various cells of your body. And we need oxygen for optimal energy levels and feeling well overall. So that's what the main purpose of B12 is. So if you're deficient in that, then maybe you would not have enough oxygen getting to your body. You might not have enough red blood cells. So what are some causes of a vitamin B12 deficiency? So if you're elderly, you can have a risk for a vitamin B12 deficiency. If you have low stomach acid, because we actually need stomach acid in order to activate a certain factor which helps to activate and absorb our vitamin B12. So if you have a poor gut health or low stomach acid, then you might not have adequate B12 absorption. Also, if you are on certain medications, they might deplete the B12. So always check to see what medication interactions or what medications reduce the absorption of certain vitamins or nutrients. And then also if you're on a vegan diet, and I'll go into this in a bit, but we need optimal B12, and that's usually from animal sources as opposed to vegetarian sources, so you can be at a risk. So those are some risks of having a B12 deficiency. So now, what are some symptoms? So of course there's fatigue, but then there's also like getting that pins and needles sensation in the hands and feet. So like I mentioned, it's important for nervous system, so it's important for our nerve cells. So if you have a B12 deficiency, then you might have that sensation. You also might be pale, and this is just due to like the anemia part of it. Maybe you get mouth ulcers or even like a swollen red tongue. Those can sometimes be symptoms that we might not know what they are caused by, but they could be caused by a vitamin B12 deficiency. And then another symptom would be dizziness. So any of those symptoms would point in the direction of a B12 deficiency. So that's B12. Let's now move on to iron. So as I mentioned before, iron and B12 are important for red blood cells, but iron specifically, we need this to make hemoglobin, and that's what is part of the red blood cell, and it carries oxygen to the body. So if you don't have enough iron, then you're not going to be able to make enough hemoglobin, and then that's not going to be able to bind the oxygen and bring it to the cells of the body. So an iron deficiency anemia would show up, and then you'd have symptoms of, like I mentioned, fatigue. But let's just talk a bit about why might you have an iron deficiency. Well, same with B12. Iron is through the diet is important. So if you have a vegan or vegetarian diet, maybe you're not getting enough iron, or maybe just in general, you don't have enough iron high foods. Also things like pregnancy. So in pregnancy, you need more iron because you have an extra body to take care of. So you have the fetus that you have to take care of, and that needs more iron. So that is a condition where maybe you're having less iron, so you might be fatigued because of that. And then another one would be hormonal things like menstruation. So monthly periods, when you're losing blood, then that can be a cause of iron deficiency anemia if you're having really heavy periods. Also, as with the B12, an optimal stomach acid and optimal digestion is important for iron absorption. So those are some of the causes or reasons why you might be low in iron. So let's talk about the symptoms. So fatigue is one of them. Another one would be heart palpitations, or that like shortness of breath feeling, maybe not being able to do enough exercise and feeling really weak. Dizziness is another one, and brittle nails or really dry hair because you need iron and nutrients for that, or even things like restless legs. So those can all be symptoms of an iron deficiency. So we talked about B12, iron, and now let's move on to vitamin D, because this one is not really commonly thought of as a deficiency that may cause fatigue, but it actually is, because vitamin D is important for our immune health, or bone health, but also so much more, because it actually acts as a hormone. So on all the cells in our body, we have receptors, and there are receptors for vitamin D, and it acts as a hormone, so it's important for our metabolism, and it's important for the function of other hormones and cells in our body. So if we have low levels of vitamin D, and that's actually pretty common because it's difficult to get it through the diet, and we mostly will get it through the sun, but it's also challenging to get optimal levels through the sun. So some causes of a vitamin D deficiency, so some people that might be more susceptible to having a vitamin D deficiency include people that live in northern climates. So even Canada, if you live in a country that maybe has a lot of winter time or not a lot of sun exposure, so anywhere that's not close to the equator. If you have darker skin, you're actually at a more risk of having a vitamin D deficiency. If you have a kidney or liver disease, because that's where conversion, there's many different forms of vitamin D, so that's where like the conversion occurs. So you might not be converting it into its active form. What else? If you stay indoors often, if you don't go out and get a lot of sun exposure, or if you don't eat the foods in the diet that would have it. So those are some of the causes of vitamin D deficiency. So how can you tell if you have one? So some symptoms might be things like you get sick often, because like I mentioned, it's important for immunity. So if you're getting sick often, if you have delayed wound healing, those can be signs of a vitamin D deficiency. And then also, like I said, fatigue. And a big one would be low mood. So, there's something called seasonal affective disorder, where in the winter months, we tend to have a low mood, or some people feel low mood, and it's actually a condition, and that's due to that vitamin D deficiency. So that would be another symptom. Okay, so now I've chatted a little bit about what the nutrient deficiencies are. So how can you treat that, or what can you do? What are some tips? So first, you want to check your levels. So you would do that through blood work and figure out where your levels are. Are you deficient? Because you don't want to be supplementing with these things unless you actually need to. So it's always important to check your levels. And then if you are deficient in them, you can supplement. And there's different ways. You can do it orally, or you can get injections. So if your levels are really low, then you might need to get a B12 injection, or a vitamin D injection, or even an iron injection. If not, if they're just slightly low, or they just need to be optimized, then getting it through a supplement, an oral supplement, is fine. So for B12, typically around 1,000 micrograms is what is like a daily recommended dose. Vitamin D is actually now around 2,500 international units. So they've increased that. It used to be around 1,000. So that would be like a daily standard dose. And then iron, it varies depending on the form, and it varies depending on, what your levels are. So that would kind of be based on working with your healthcare provider. But you can also get it through the food. So like I mentioned, B12 and iron are high in animal products. So B12 is found in things like eggs and meat products. But for some vegans, they can get it through nutritional yeast. Then iron, again, meat products, but also things like legumes and lentils, tofu, dark leafy greens, and even dark chocolate. They have good sources of iron. And then vitamin D is a little tricky, but you can get it through things like salmon, eggs, things that are fortified with vitamin D, or the sun, like I mentioned. Okay, so if anybody has any questions about the deficiencies or the nutrient portion of things, let me know before we jump into the next one. So seeing some comments, some people are saying like their energy is low. A vegan diet is difficult. I agree. Yep. So it can be challenging to get certain nutrients through the vegan diet. You definitely can still thrive on it, but just making sure, okay, if you need to check if you're deficient in anything, then doing that, and then making sure what you're deficient in, then you can always supplement with if you need to. And then grass-fed meat is great to increase your iron, so different forms of meat. Meat is a good way of increasing iron. So there's a question about what foods are good for iron. So like I mentioned, meat is a good one, and the dark leafy green vegetables, so things like spinach, broccoli, have good sources of iron. And then like vegetarian sources of protein or even just non-vegetarian sources, like if you want to have legumes, tofu, those are good sources of iron. Like I said, dark chocolate actually has iron in it too. Oats, nuts, those are your main sources, but the biggest sources would be like meat, chicken, eggs, fish would be the bigger sources of iron. Okay, so let's move into the thyroid now. So if you're not familiar with the thyroid, it is a gland. It actually sits at the front of your neck here, and it's important for metabolism, for body temperature, for energy, and it releases the hormones T3 and T4. Basically, those are your thyroid hormones, and they go to all the cells of the body, and they are important for regulating all those things that I mentioned. So your thyroid can either be overactive or it can be underactive. So I'm going to be actually chatting about the underactive one, which is called hypothyroidism. So if you have an underactive thyroid, then these are some symptoms you might experience. So of course, since we're talking about fatigue, that is one of them that you might experience. You might also have dry skin, weight gain, constipation, muscle aches, even just feeling weak or difficulty concentrating, slowed heart rate. So any of those symptoms, that would be maybe leading towards potentially a thyroid or a hypothyroid condition. So those are some things that you can consider looking into if those are symptoms that you experience. So of course you want to always test. So how can we reverse an underactive thyroid? Well, of course, if it is very underactive, so a way that this would show up on your blood work would be your TSH number would be really high, and then your thyroid hormones would be low. So if that is the case, then maybe you'd have to go on medication, depending on, again, how your levels are. If it's just, sluggish or slightly or still within the range, then you have to discuss that with your doctor depending on if you need to go on medication or not. But let's talk about some tips that you could do regardless if you're on medication or not, and how you can support your thyroid. So thyroid needs certain minerals and nutrients in order to make its hormones. So selenium and zinc are two important hormones for thyroid health. So I'm not too sure if you're familiar with these minerals, selenium and zinc, but you can get them through the diet, or again, you can supplement with them. So in terms of selenium, we need around 200 micrograms, or maybe even a little bit less, but it's one of those ones you have to be careful with. You don't ever want to go over 400. And then zinc, you need around 10 milligrams. That's just the recommended amount. Of course, it can be a little bit more or less, I don't know, depending on what you work with your healthcare provider, but those are just the RDAs for that. So you can get those through the diet. So zinc can actually be found in meat, in a lot of seafood, and nuts and seeds. And then selenium is actually high in Brazil nuts. So if you take 2 Brazil nuts a day, that actually will get you around 200 micrograms of selenium. So those are 2 minerals that you should have in order to support your thyroid. Another thing is stress management. So the thyroid is greatly impacted by stress. So if we are, during times of high stress, maybe even the pandemic, or a shift in our daily routine, then we can experience high amounts of stress and cortisol, and that can impact actually our thyroid and our thyroid function. So you want to do things that are more nourishing and grounding, rather than things that are going to really stress out your body even more. So in terms of exercise, maybe doing something like yoga or meditation to help ground your body and nourish you, rather than high intensity interval training, would be a better option if you have a thyroid condition. Another thing in terms of diet, so I mentioned things that you can consume, but there's also some things that you should maybe avoid, not completely, but try to limit those. So things like raw cruciferous vegetables. So these are called goitrogens, and they actually impact the thyroid function. So if you have an underactive thyroid, you want to avoid raw cruciferous vegetables. So that's things like broccoli, kale, cauliflower, bok choy. You can still eat them, just make sure you steam them, or steam them or roast them, boil them, however you want to eat them. They're super important for your health, but just don't have them raw. And then also things like almonds and soy products, you should also try to not have too much of those, so avoid those ones. And then also in the diet, you want to make sure that you're getting adequate amount of protein. So tyrosine, which is an amino acid, is important for the thyroid. So basically it is the building block of the thyroid hormone. So making sure you're getting adequate protein in the diet. So I've kind of chatted a little bit about thyroid. Does anybody have any questions about the thyroid, whether it be the symptoms that I mentioned, or other ways, or testing, or any other questions about the thyroid? So like I mentioned, the thyroid is important for overall energy, metabolism, body temperature, And if you have an underactive thyroid, then you can feel fatigue, and you need to make sure that you get to that if that's your root cause. Otherwise, other ways won't really help in terms of boosting your energy. So someone mentioned they've been adding spinach to their smoothies, so that's great. That's a great way of like hiding some greens into your diet. If you're somebody that doesn't really enjoy having vegetables, or even for kids, that's a great way of getting their veggies in their diet. If you don't really taste spinach in a smoothie, especially if you're adding in like a protein powder or other things, it's a good way of adding in some good greens and like iron, like we mentioned, and other nutrients too. Okay. So how can I see if my thyroid is working properly? Blood test. Yes. So it would be through a blood test. There's different tests. If you do a whole panel, it includes your TSH, which is the hormone that comes from the brain, goes to the thyroid, and then the thyroid releases your T3, T4. So those would show up. You can also look for antibodies to make sure there's no autoimmune disease, and then a reverse T3, which is the inactive form of T3. So great question. Okay, next we're gonna move on to poor diet and how can this impact your fatigue. So what we eat fuels our body. If we don't have an optimal diet, then we are not going to feel well. We're not going to have that energy or that vitality that we should have. So what are some things that would consist of a poor diet? And this would be things like too much sugar, too much caffeine, too many processed foods, too much salt, a lot of takeout, and then a lack of diversity. So a lack of vegetables, a lack of fruit, a lack of whole foods. So those are kind of things that might lead to a poor diet. And if we have a poor diet that's not diverse, then we're not going to have an optimal microbiome. And then we'll get into that in a bit, but that can impact your overall health. So if you have a poor diet, or if you're noticing that maybe you're taking out food a lot, or you're having like really salty food, or you're having a lot of that processed food, then what are ways that you can improve your diet so that way you can have more energy? So you always want to make sure you're balancing your meals. So you should balance them with a protein, a carbohydrate, and a healthy fat. So protein includes things like meat or animal products, or even like legumes and tofu in case you want vegetarian products. Your carbohydrates are important, but you want to make sure that there's vegetables included in that. So lots of leafy green vegetables, your orange vegetables like bell peppers, sweet potatoes are great for helping with energy production. Having things like mushrooms, spinach, any type of vegetable is going to be helping balancing out your meal. And then healthy fat, so things like avocado, salmon, extra virgin olive oil, coconut yogurt, what else? Walnuts, chia seeds, hemp hearts, all of those are healthy fats. So making sure that you balance your meals is going to make you feel, one, satiated, so you're going to be able to feel full better, and also provide you with all the nutrients and energy that you need in order to feel well. Last week I spoke a little bit about the plate method, so you can go and check that out on last week's video. We talked about diets and the plate method and how you should kind of picture your plate when making a meal. So go check that out if you need some more help with that. And then another great thing that we should have in our diet that is actually lacking for a lot of us is fiber. So we should get like 25 to around 38 grams of fiber a day. And typical like Canadian American diet, we get about half of that, or just most adults tend to get half of that. And fiber is huge. It's important for balancing your blood sugar so you don't have crashes in blood sugar, or you don't have spikes, because that can impact your energy. It's important for making you feel full. It's important for healthy bowel movements and healthy weight and metabolism. So making sure you're getting in lots of fiber in your diet is important. So things like oats, apple, kale, ground flax seeds are huge. other legumes, avocado. Those are all really good sources of fiber, and you want to make sure you're adding that in your diet so that way you're having a healthy, balanced diet. Okay, so I talked a lot about that, about diet. Does anybody have questions about diet, or if they need certain tips or ways, like meal ideas or ways to be on track with healthy meals? Let me know in the comments and I will answer your questions about diet. So far we've chatted a little bit about different causes so far for fatigue. So we talked about the nutrient deficiencies, we talked about thyroid, we just talked about diet and how all these play a role in your energy. And then I will be going into the adrenal fatigue shortly. Okay, so in terms of diet questions, someone's asking, how often should I eat? So typically 3 meals a day is usually a good way of having balanced meals. So if you space your meals out about 4 or 5 hours apart, having 3 meals a day, trying not to eat too late. So not after, if you try to go to bed around 11, try not eating later than 7, 8 p.m. But of course, this depends on everyone's schedule, what you can do, how hungry. If you're feeling hungry every couple of hours, you gotta see, okay, so is your meal balanced enough? Does it have enough protein and fat in it? Because those are what help keep you fuller longer, especially the fat. So if you're feeling hungry every couple of hours, maybe your meal isn't big enough. Or maybe if you're someone that cannot eat too much, then maybe you need to have 4 meals. But it's better to have fuller meals than to have snacks and graze throughout the day, because that can impact your blood sugar and your insulin. So making sure that you're having either 3 or 4 good meals a day. And then another huge thing would be making sure you're having enough water. So we can often mistake dehydration as hunger. So those times that you're not eating, making sure that you're staying hydrated, you're drinking water. We should be getting at least 2 liters of water a day. It depends on your weight and your height, but generally 2 liters a day is a good amount to get. So maybe you're actually not hungry, but maybe you need more water to stay hydrated. So those are some tips for that. All right. Okay. Let's jump into adrenal fatigue. So this is a term that gets thrown around a lot and people aren't really sure what adrenal fatigue is, but basically what our adrenals are these 2 little glands, and they sit on top of our kidneys, and they are important for releasing so many different hormones in our body, and has so many different roles in the body. But one main thing is that they release cortisol, and cortisol actually is important. It's important for fighting infections. It's important stress response when we need it, but long-term stress can actually interfere with cortisol production, and it can either make us have too much cortisol, so we're constantly releasing cortisol, or our body kind of gets fatigued and we don't release enough. So that's kind of what the adrenals do, and they work together with our hypothalamus and our pituitary, which are parts in our brain, and the adrenal. So it's called the HPA axis, and that works on a mechanism, a feedback loop, in order to make sure we have optimal levels of cortisol in our body. Our adrenals are also important for epinephrine and adrenaline, so those kind of hormones too. So making sure that we're having an optimal HPA axis is important in order to balance our energy and help improve our fatigue and prevent, burnout or exhaustion, or kind of terms that happen if we have long-term stress response, because we shouldn't be chronically stressed. That is not good. We should be overall balanced. We should have a little bit of stress when we need it, but if you're constantly finding that you're anxious, or if you're finding that you're spending too much time, always doing a certain task and you don't have that time to take to yourself, or you don't do any self-care techniques, or you're always going from one project to the next and you're never taking a break or giving yourself a deep breath, then those are things that can impact our cortisol production and can cause that stress response. So let's talk about some symptoms. So there can be high cortisol, there can be low cortisol. I'm just going to talk about some general symptoms. It is important to know which one you have in order to know how you're going to treat it, but I will just talk a little bit about some general symptoms. So some general symptoms of adrenal fatigue or cortisol dysregulation, however you want to call it, could be things like cravings for sugar and cravings for salt, that tired but wired feeling, or that exhausted feeling, having a racing mind, having weight issues, so either difficulty losing weight, or maybe you are losing weight, exhaustion, and then of course difficulty sleeping. So in terms of cortisol, it has a role in the body with melatonin. So cortisol, it should actually spike at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then it starts to dip, and then in the evening it should be its lowest. Melatonin is the opposite. It should actually be low in the morning, and then it starts to increase, and in the evening it will peak around midnight, or even just actually a little bit before midnight, and then it will kind of stay up and then go down. So the reason why we need cortisol in the morning, it should spike and get us out of bed, and we should have that energy boost and feel good to take on the day. Melatonin should be high in the evening in order to help us feel ready and tired for bed. So somebody mentioned in the comments, like, my energy is low in the late afternoon. Well, that is because cortisol spikes and then it starts to come down. In the late afternoon, it starts to get on its lower end. So it could be that kind of cortisol dip that's going down that might be impacting your late afternoon. Also, sometimes after we eat lunch, if we have a big meal, our body takes time to digest, so we feel a little bit sluggish in the afternoon. So those can be reasons why. So you want to always make sure that your cortisol and melatonin are balanced. If they're imbalanced, you might be having spikes of cortisol in the evening and you might not be able to sleep. Or your cortisol might not spike in the morning and you're feeling tired and not able to get out of bed. So it's important to always know that those two kind of work in opposition. So you want to make sure you're not doing things that interfere with the production of melatonin. So things like blue light on the computers, things like staying up late past a certain time. So if you're staying up too late in late at night, like in 1 or 2 a.m., then you're not able to get that cortisol spike at the proper time in the morning. Okay, so I chatted quite a bit about what adrenal fatigue, cortisol looks like. So what are some tips that you can do in order to boost your energy and combat adrenal fatigue? So first of all, stress management is key. As I mentioned, stress has a big impact on the adrenals and the cortisol. So important things would be making sure you manage your stress. So like I said, if you're constantly working, if you're constantly not giving yourself a break, you have to make sure that you set those boundaries and give yourself a break, whether it be every hour you get up from what you're doing and go take a few minutes to even just sit outside, take a breath of fresh air, drink a glass of water. You need to be able to give yourself time to recharge and rejuvenate. Another thing would be doing things like yoga, grounding exercises, or even any other exercises is fine too. But like I mentioned before, maybe you don't want to do things that are super high intensity. So even like a light jog or swimming, walking, those would be good ways of managing stress. There's many different stress techniques, but you need to find what works for you. So if you're somebody that likes writing things down, maybe you do journaling. If you're somebody that likes listening to music, maybe that's a way of managing your stress. But you have to make sure you include those in your everyday. Otherwise, the long-term stresses of cortisol will impact you in the long run. Another thing would be getting a good night's sleep. like I mentioned with the blue light. So actually next week I'm going to be chatting all about sleep. So we'll go more into detail about those later, but making sure you're getting a good night's sleep is another one. And then supplements. So a B complex is actually a great supplement that is good for adrenal fatigue and supporting your adrenals because it has many different B vitamins in it, specifically vitamin B5. That's what's really good for the adrenal glands. They need these B vitamins in order to thrive and support like the conversion of different enzymatic processes that go on in the body. So having a B complex is good. But if you need something even more, a little bit more of a boost for your energy, a good thing is called adaptogens. So if you've never heard about adaptogens, these are herbal remedies that help the body buffer stress or help the body mitigate the negative effects of stress. And there's many different adaptogens. Actually, let me know in the comments right now, is there any adaptogens that you have tried and how did you feel with them? So there's many different adaptogens and you want to make sure that you get one that is suitable for you because there's ones that are stimulating and there's ones that are more calming. And if, like I mentioned before, if you're like that wired mind and racing and restless and you can't sleep and you're that like tired but wired feeling, you actually don't want something that's stimulating. It's probably gonna, do you more harm than good. You want something that's more relaxing and grounding. So something like ashwagandha or something like holy basil. Those are two good adaptogens that are more calming and nourishing. However, if you are more on the like lower cortisol side, so if you have cravings for salt, if you have a low blood pressure, if you feel really exhausted, if you have like difficulty sleeping where you're waking up throughout the night, then maybe you want something a bit more of a stimulating one. So maybe something like rhodiola or one of the ginsengs. Those would be more of the stimulating adaptogens. So that's why it's always so important to know where you sit and what your levels are of certain things, because you have to know in order to treat properly. So those are kind of some tips and ways that you can help combat adrenal fatigue. So let's see what some people are saying in the comments. Someone says, I feel like my years of schooling hasn't helped my adrenals. Yes, I agree. Like that constant stress or constantly having exams is not good. I heard you could take melatonin supplement to help with sleep, but I really do not want to take pills. All their alternatives. So next week I'm going to be going into sleep, all about tips for sleep. So stay tuned for that. Yes, I'll go into that next week. Chamomile. So chamomile is a good herb. It doesn't actually work as like an adaptogen, but it's a calming herb. So it has a different effect on the body than adaptogens do. It's more of like what we call a nervine. So it's more of like a calming herb. So that would be good if you're feeling anxious or like more anxious and anxiety and stress. That is a good calming one for that. So yes, I prefer 3 meals. It's better for digestion, I have noticed. Yeah. Everybody's different, but 3 meals is good for most people. And somebody said they cannot stomach chamomile. Yeah, some people don't like chamomile. Okay, I'm going to go into gut infections now. So gut infections can have a big impact on our overall health. If our body's trying to fight off certain infections, so things like Candida or SIBO, so that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or H. pylori, or if we just don't have optimal levels of our good gut bacteria, then we can have poor gut health. And gut health is important for absorbing all these nutrients. So if you're eating good things in your diet, but then you have an unbalanced gut microbiome, or if you have an infection like an overgrowth of bacteria, then your gut health is not optimal and you're probably not absorbing all the things that you need to absorb, and your body's trying to fight off this infection, so you're going to feel tired or you're constantly going to feel weak. So there's different there's different symptoms for all those things that I mentioned, like Candida, SIBO, but all kind of mention some general symptoms of gut health infections. So this can be things like bloating, so bloating after eating, constipation, or diarrhea. Even things like skin rashes or brain fog can be a sign of a chronic gut, infection, or indigestion, so not being able to digest your food. So those can be signs of a gut infection. So what do you want to do in terms of, if you have a gut infection, how can you get rid of it so then that way you can boost your energy? Well, it's quite intense and there's quite a bit to be done. But first, you want to see if there's any foods that are kind of triggering your gut health. So are there any foods that are making it worse? Some common things could be like dairy, wheat, certain fruits or vegetables even can bother some people if they're difficult to digest. This might depend, it might vary from person to person. So trying to figure out what your sensitivities are and removing them. Then you want to make sure you eliminate the bacteria or the fungi, whatever is in there. So of course there's many different ways of doing this. From like a naturopathic perspective, we would do antimicrobial herbs. So there's, again, so many different ones, but this can be things like berberine. So that's based off of different herbs like hydrastis or golden seal. And then things like even garlic, those are strong antifungals. So working with a healthcare practitioner to get rid of the bad gut bacteria and using a herb in order to do that. So you'd have to eliminate that. And then once you eliminate it, you can bring back the good gut bacteria with good probiotics, making sure you're getting a multi-strain probiotic in order to repopulate all the lost bacteria, or maybe if you had a deficiency in that, then bringing them back. And then working on adding in like probiotic foods in the diet, so things like yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, so all those like fermented foods, having those in your diet are important. So really with the diet and the gut infection part, you want to make sure you're getting to the root of whatever it is. Like I mentioned, if you don't have an optimal gut health, then you're going to feel tired and you're going to feel lethargic. You're not going to be digesting your food properly. Things are going to be sitting there. You're not going to feel good. So that is a huge overlooked cause of fatigue, because we don't tend to think of like our gut, but it is a huge cause that can, really impact your fatigue or your quality of life overall. So before we jump into the last one, which is inflammation, let me know in the comments what you want to know about the gut infections or anything that we just talked about so far. Okay, so somebody mentioned ginseng, so I think they were talking about before when I mentioned like the adaptogen. So yep, ginseng is one, and I mentioned it's a stimulating one. H. pylori, so that is a gut infection. CBD oil. CBD oil is it works more on our cannabinoid receptors. So it helps with things like pain, chronic pain, sleep issues, many other things. Any probiotics you like to recommend? Yeah, so like I said, a good multi-strain. So that basically like at least like 10, 11 billion CFU is what it's called in the capsule. So you want to make sure it's a multi-strain. So looking at certain brands, I usually like the ones that were refrigerated, and making sure that those ones, always look at the back, make sure it's a multi-strain, or it should say multi-strain. Those are the best ones to take because they cover a wide range of things. But then in sort of specific ones, S. boulardii, which is a specific probiotic, that one is good for like after chronic infections and stuff. That one's a good one for helping build things back up. So you could start with that and then adding in the multi-strain. Do they cause ulcers? I think we're referring to the infections. So H. pylori can cause ulcer if it's there like long term. Stress can even cause ulcers. Chronic NSAID use, so chronic Advil use can cause ulcers. So yep, so some things can cause ulcers, and that can also impact your overall gut health. You'd want to make sure if there's any bacteria in there. So like H. pylori, if you have H. pylori, you got to do a pretty strong antibiotic regimen to get rid of that. So that one you need to do that for. In terms of Candida, SIBO, you can try to start with antimicrobial herbs and see if that helps first. But yeah, making sure that you get rid of things so they don't lead to ulcers is important. And somebody mentioned they love yoga or Pilates on the weekend. Yeah, that's a great way of calming down stress and helping to feel more relaxed and getting that mind-body connection. All right, let's talk about the last root cause of fatigue. This is inflammation. So inflammation is actually, acute inflammation is actually important. So we need it to, if we're fighting off infection, our body will release certain things in our body that increase an inflammatory response, and that is actually important for fighting off infection. So acute inflammation is actually important, but it's the chronic, long-standing inflammation that can really wreak havoc on our body. So what can cause this? Well, you bet high stress can cause chronic inflammation, high amounts of processed sugar, so a poor diet, so like a diet high in inflammatory foods, so like inflammatory oils, that can really cause inflammation in the body. And then lack of the good oil, omega-3s, so you want more omega-3s in the diet. We tend to have a lack of that, so that can cause inflammation. Chronic infections, like chronic long-term infections, if you chronically get sick, can cause inflammation. What else? Even things like food sensitivities can cause inflammation if your body's constantly reacting, or if you have like an allergy or intolerance to something and you're always eating it. So there's many different things that can cause inflammation, but those are some of the main ones. So how can you get rid of inflammation, or how can you reduce inflammation in your body? So like I said, diet is huge. So if you're having a high inflammatory diet, so things like I mentioned before, so a lot of processed foods, a lot of red meat, a lot of sugary foods. It's really the sugary and the salty foods. A lot of takeout, those can cause inflammation in the body. So you want to make sure you're reducing the amount of that and then increasing the amount of good anti-inflammatory foods. So this is like lots of fruits and vegetables. All your fruits and veggies are great for reducing inflammation. Making sure you're having good quality fat, like I mentioned, avocado, salmon, nuts and seeds are great for helping reduce inflammation. And then you can even look at having a fish oil supplement. So a fish oil supplement is basically called like an omega-3 supplement, and it consists of good anti-inflammatory, high quality fish oils, making sure you're getting something that's high quality, and you want the ratio of EPA to DHA to be at least a 2-to-1, and an overall around 2,000 milligrams of fish oil. So this is a great anti-inflammatory supplement, and that will help reduce overall inflammation in the body. But you can also look at anti-inflammatory herbs, and these are things like ginger and turmeric. So you could either use these like in your diet, so you could cook with them, or you can take them in a capsule form or in a liquid form, and they are helpful for reducing inflammation in the body. Okay, so we talked about quite a bit. I'm going to do a recap, but while I'm doing that, let me know in the comments what kind of questions you have for me today. Any questions about anything that we chatted about, go ahead, put them in the comments and I will answer them. So we chatted about many different things, like what the root causes of fatigue are and how you can boost your energy. So if you have a nutrient deficiency, that was number one. So if you have a nutrient deficiency, making sure you're figuring out what that is. Is it iron? Is it B12? Is it vitamin D? Or is it something else? And working on boosting that nutrient in your body, whether it be through diet or supplement, depending on how your levels are. The next one we chatted about was your thyroid, so how you can have an underactive thyroid, and that can really impact your metabolism and your energy. So making sure you're checking that out with your blood work and doing something, whether you need to take a medication for it, and then supporting with things like I said, selenium and zinc, and some more grounding, relaxing exercises. We talked about poor diet and how what we eat and what we put in our body really fuels our energy. So making sure you're having balanced meals, lower amounts of processed foods, more fruits and fresh veggies, more whole grains and whole foods, making sure you're having protein and fat with every meal so that way you feel fuller longer. And we talked about adrenal fatigue and the role of cortisol in the body, and how if we have chronic stress, how that can impact our body and we can feel burnt out, or we can feel that tired and wired feeling. So making sure you're managing your stress, looking into different supplements like a B complex or B5 or certain adaptogens that can help mitigate the stress in your body, depending on if you have either high levels of cortisol or low levels of cortisol. Then we talked about gut infections and how those really wreak havoc on your digestive system, and how it's important to get to the root cause of what gut infection do you have, eradicate it, whether you need to go with antibiotics or antimicrobials, and then really repopulating good gut bacteria, making sure that you're feeling healthy and you're getting in good probiotics and eating a healthy full diet. That way you can prevent further infections. And then we chatted about inflammation and how this can be caused by many different things, and how you can have an optimal anti-inflammatory diet, take some fish oil and have some fatty nuts, fatty fish in your diet to help reduce the inflammation. Okay, so let's see what people are saying. So there's a question. So many people say that coconut yogurt is high in saturated fat and low in calcium. Is this true? So coconut is coconut or coconut oil. It is a fat, right? So it's not one of the more it's not like olive oil or avocado oil. It is a little bit more in the saturated fat, so that is correct. But it is still a healthy option for like a yogurt option if you can't have dairy, or if you don't want to have dairy. Having coconut yogurt is still a good option for getting in some good probiotics, because they are added in there, and it is a good healthy fat. Of course, everything you have to have, you can't have everything, like excess amounts of anything is never good. Always have moderation. So having that sporadically, whether it be a couple times a week, is better than having it every day. Maybe it can cause a rash like it did for me. Maybe we're talking about here, are we talking about inflammation? Are we talking about stress potentially? Or a gut infection, yep, those can cause rashes. Is probiotic yogurt good for you? So we kind of just talked about that. Yep, so probiotic yogurt is good, but always you want to get, same thing with the coconut yogurt, you want to make sure you're getting yogurts that are no sugar added to them, because when you add the sugar, it actually isn't too good for you, because it can, again, spike your blood sugar if you're having yogurt, because then when we have yogurt, we tend to put things like fruit, which are good, but they still have sugar, or we put granola on them, and these are extra sugary things. So making sure you're having a like low sugar or no sugar yogurt, and having one that's high in protein is better. So like a Greek yogurt. Probiotics are helpful. Yep. What is the difference between refrigerated and room temperature probiotics? So it really just is, it's based on like how they can survive and what they need or what they don't need. So the ones that go in the fridge, they need to be staying at a cold temperature in order to survive, otherwise they'll go bad. So the ones that are room temperature are able to be stable at room temperature. I find that the ones in the fridge tend to be a bit better, higher quality, and a better strain. Yes. Okay, so I'll let you guys ask some more questions, but I want to leave you with my top 5 tips in order to help boost your energy. So regardless if you have any of those conditions that we talked about, or if you don't and you just want tips to boost your energy, these are 5 tips. So number 1 would be eat a balanced diet. We talked about diet, how important that is, and how it's important for balancing your blood sugar, and how it's important for getting the right food in to get the proper nutrients to boost your energy. So number 1, have a balanced diet, making sure you're having protein, carbohydrates, fats, veggies in your diet. Number 2 would be drinking plenty of water. Like I mentioned, you can have about 2 liters of water a day is optimal. Depends on your size of your body, but 2 liters is great, and that's important for hydrating all the cells in your body, preventing dehydration, which can cause fatigue. Number 3 would be get good quality sleep. So next week I'm going to be chatting all about some tips of how to improve your sleep. So stay tuned for that. Number 4 would be get outside, move your body, just move around a little bit, get some fresh air, get some vitamin D in the sun. And number 5 would be consider potentially taking some supplements. If I could pick 2, I would say vitamin D is huge, and then a good quality fish oil, because we could all reduce some chronic inflammation in our body. So if we don't have any other questions for today, I'll give you all a couple minutes. But if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel, join the community. We do this every Friday at 7 p.m. We talk about different health topics, and I answer your questions in the Q&A. And then give this video a thumbs up. Like I mentioned before, it helps with the YouTube algorithm and getting things noticed across the channel and across YouTube. You can turn on notifications, so you can hit the bell and turn on notifications. That way you're notified every time I go live. And then share share this video, share this channel with your friends, your family, anyone that you think would benefit from it. Okay, so I think that's it. That's everyone, all the questions. So yeah, I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you all next week. Bye.